Keep your hand up if you got a card. Karen, Melissa, you guys got it. Great. So I'll grab your question. So, how many of you here have heard of Cambridge Analytica? How many of you knew they were in Colorado first, before they went national? Well, they were. In 2014, with the help of Cambridge Analytica, and pretending to be someone he's not, Cory Gardner won the election for the United States Senate for the state of Colorado. Cambridge Analytica stole data from voters without our consent, and they've never really stopped operating, even if the entity by that name has officially closed. They now have at least 5,000 data points on every voter in America. They took their experiment in 2014 to get Cory Gardner elected, to re-elect Mike Kaufman, and it was the year we lost the state Senate. And when it worked for them in 2014, they took it national, and it got us Donald Trump. They waged psychological warfare, vote suppression, on the electorate, no longer just hacking elections, but hacking the electorate itself. And it worked. How did they do it? By studying and amplifying our infighting, what makes us angry, what makes us depressed, what makes us anxious. They studied what makes us want to give up, weaponizing it, and deploying it in a targeted way through our Facebook feeds to change outcomes of the election. But they didn't do this by choosing to run better candidates, or have better ideas, or to do anything to actually try to help life, to make life better for the people. They instead chose to promote infighting and divisions within the electorate. That not only got us Cory Gardner and the loss of the state Senate, but as I said, it got us Donald Trump in 2016. The Republicans, Russians, right-wing data thieves never stopped and are already in full gear for 2020. We're not in an era of campaigns as usual. And there is more at stake than just Democratic or Republican wins on the line. Our democracy is at stake. Some may claim that Cory Gardner or Donald Trump are already goners, that it's obvious to one and all why he must go. But it's not. We must make the case to the people of Colorado on why they deserve better. And then we must deliver on that promise. Because of Cory Gardner, he and Mitch McConnell have been able to kill campaign finance reform, background checks, raising wages for workers in America. They've been able to kill the DREAM Act and immigration reform. We have been unable to properly assist in natural disasters, pass immigration reform, address climate change, restore net neutrality, pass the Equality Act, reauthorize the Violence Against Women Act, or actually make progress on achieving universal health care. Instead, we've seen a mindless rubber stamping of corrupt and inept cabinet leaders who have damaged public education, public lands, the environment, and enabled kids to be put in cages, kidnapped from their parents at the border. We have appointed sexual harassers to the highest court of the land, for the United States Supreme Court, and Roe versus Wade is in true danger. We've abandoned our allies, coddled dictators, and seen one of the worst income and wealth gaps this country has ever seen. Because of Cory Gardner, Trump, who has committed a litany of high crimes and misdemeanors, will not ever face an impeachment conviction vote in the United States Senate. In short, he has enabled, and he meaning Cory Gardner, has enabled America to see a rise in white nationalism, anti-democratic behaviors, the destruction of our planet and our humanity. But not everybody knows or sees that. So today you have a chance to meet with most of our candidates running for the United States Senate to help defeat Cory Gardner. Not just to right those wrongs, but because they have a vision for how we can really truly start to do right by the people of our state and our country. And I want to take a moment to thank them personally for running and taking the time to be here Their schedules are tough, and it is not easy to run for office, so please let's start by giving them a hand. The most important takeaway we have today is all of these candidates will tell you they want you to choose one of their campaigns and get involved now to do everything you can to help your favorite candidate in the election. We have the power to make it better. We have the responsibility to make it better, but we have the power to make it better by our engagement. Even more, I want to take a moment and just thank you, all of you in the audience who took the time to be here today, because you care and you know we deserve better. So I do encourage you to get to know the candidates, join a campaign, get involved, and at the end of the day, it will be the voters of Colorado who decide who we want to represent us in the United States Senate and who will help us flip the United States Senate and take back our democracy. So with that, I am pleased to introduce our Executive Director, Felicia.
A few housekeeping rules. We've got a timekeeper. We will have basically 90 seconds for most of the questions, 60 for some. And another housekeeping rule, there are no recordings. We've got some press here in the audience that have been already approved, and they will be doing some recording, but otherwise there's no video nor audio recording. Thank you. All right, let's get started. Y'all ready? Okay, so they're in alphabetical order according to their first name. Usually they're in alphabetical order according to their last name, which means they always sit next to the same person. So we thought we'd shake it up a little bit this time, because, you know, they're always responding or kind of following someone who they may or may not want to follow or proceed. So with that, yeah, you're in the middle, it just kind of works out that way. Starting with that, we're going to start with Andrew Romanoff, and the first question is a question that you already know. Tell us about yourself, why you are running, and what are your top 3 priorities?
I want to say thanks to all of you for sharing your time. I want to give a special shout out to the youngest person in this room. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that right, because Noah, will you wave your hand, Noah? Noah told me he had a choice to come. He could have been across the street playing with his friend, but he said he could do that anytime. My name's Andrew Romanoff. I led the Democrats in Colorado to our first majority in 30 years, became the Speaker of the House, got recognized as the most effective legislative leader in America. I figured politics doesn't reward modesty, so I want to make sure to work that into my presentation. I joined this race for the U.S. Senate because I think you and I are literally running out of time to rescue our planet, to repair our democracy, and to restore the American dream. Maybe if we were having this conversation 30 or 40 years ago, we could have settled for the incremental reform that some folks are proposing. It's too late for that. You asked me, Louise, the 3 issues that matter most to me. It is to combat this climate emergency, to solve our healthcare crisis, and to build an economy that works for everyone. We've laid out an aggressive platform on our website at andrewromanoff.com. I encourage you to read it. And the most important thing I want to say to you is this, is what Morgan said. You get the right to decide. I know that doesn't sit well with the folks in Washington at the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, who are trying to derail this campaign and anoint a winner before any ballots are cast. You want to defend your right to vote, pick a candidate, not just to defeat Cory Gardner, but to lead the way for a more hopeful future through the U.S. Senate.
My name is Bray, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I have 4 kids, and I've been involved in climate activism for 10 years. The way that I got interested in the climate and the climate crisis is that my husband and I and our kids were in Australia. We saw that Australia was dredging a harbor and dumping the spoil on the Great Barrier Reef in order to then build 3 liquefied natural gas plants. They did that. We got back to the United States. I started researching and saw that Colorado had turned into an industrial oil and gas petro state. I got involved for the last 10 years. I've been trying to force industry to be regulated at all different levels. I've been working at grassroots level. I'm also a clinical psychologist. I have a very deep interest in public and mental health. I'm advocating for a single payer Medicare for all system. I want the insurance companies out of the picture. I think they take advantage of our illnesses, accidents, and injuries. I also want to find a way to reduce gun trauma, gun violence, and I'm advocating for that as well. So my three most important issues are addressing the climate crisis, addressing our health care crisis, and finding ways to reduce the inequalities that we are experiencing in this country right now. Thank you so much for the invitation. I look forward to talking more about all these issues.
So my name is John Hickenlooper. I come to this position from a different path than most people. I started out as a geologist. I was out of work for a couple of years, ended up opening the first brew pub in Colorado. I'm not sure what that means. I got into politics to try and solve problems and to help people. Obviously, so many problems to list. If I'm going to pick three, I think climate change has to be on that list. I think the incredible spikes in healthcare costs has to be there, and the prevalence of dark money in our politics and the role that that's playing. None of these problems are getting solved right now in Washington, D.C. And certainly Cory Gardner has been a big part of why those problems aren't getting solved. He supported Mitch McConnell and President Trump 98% of the time. He has actively worked to remove the pre-existing conditions that protect people, the protections for people with pre-existing conditions, for pre-existing medical conditions. He has taken enormous amounts of political action committee money, PAC money, and then done what they directed him to do. He's received the benefit of over $4 million from the NRA. He is undermining and undercutting all our efforts around climate and around our ability to protect our public lands. So I want to go to Washington. I want to be part of actually solving the problems and delivering results.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorena Garcia, and if there's anything that I want you to take away from today, it's my name. So we're all going to do this together. On the count of three, everyone is going to say Lorena Garcia. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Lorena Garcia. Excellent. Good job. So I have had the awesome opportunity of leading social justice nonprofit organizations in Colorado for about 15 years. I led 9 to 5 National Association of Working Women, COLOR, the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. I led the Women's Lobby of Colorado. Right now, I'm the executive director of the Colorado Statewide Parent Coalition. All of this work has taken me all across the state, working with directly impacted individuals and communities to make sure that their voices, our voices, are heard and listened to at the policymaking table. The reason why I'm running for U.S. Senate was because the day that Brett Kavanaugh was confirmed to the U.S. Senate, I literally fell to my knees in fear that the rights that I and many of you in this room have fought for generations could be turned over because the GOP is manipulating our court system to get around the fact that they have losing policies. That's why I'm running. The situation that we are in today requires new leadership. It requires new blood. And I thank those on this panel who have served before, but it's time to make room. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on a Sunday afternoon to just be in this space. This is what democracy looks like. My name is, that's right, we should be clapping for our democracy. My name is Michelle Ferrigno Warren, and I'm running for United States Senate. The last 10 years, I have been working alongside Congress, both as a policy expert and a builder of coalitions on some of our country's most pressing issues, like immigration reform, criminal justice reform, and education equity. I didn't decide to get into politics one day. It really came as a result of a journey. When I left with my math degree from college, I chose to take it and teach in the local public school in some of the most at-risk communities in Dallas. After a few years of teaching, my husband and I returned to our home state of Colorado and started a home for homeless teen girls, then started a community development organization addressing issues around poverty, addictions, and homelessness. It didn't take long for me to realize that while social justice programming is paramount to walking alongside individuals and communities with some of their most greatest vulnerable problems, but when systems are broken, we need to change them. And I became an advocate and an activist and have been walking alongside my neighbors and friends, which in my zip code, over 75% of my neighbors and friends are Latino. And so immigration reform has been one of my most banner issues because I come from a faith background where I truly believe we need to love our neighbors as ourselves. In addition to immigration reform, I also feel very strongly about transitioning our energy economy if we're going to combat the climate crisis, and then also equity issues. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everyone. How are we? My name is Stephany Spaulding, and I have been working in higher education for the last 15 years. I earned a PhD from Purdue University. Actually, I graduated on my 29th birthday. And I say that not to just brag, but men brag all the time, but to say that the work and the tenacity of what it takes to earn a PhD, and less than 2% of the American population having that, demonstrates the kind of intellectualism as well as persistence that I have been carrying forward all of my life. And so I am the chair of Women's and Ethnic Studies at the University of Colorado in the Springs. I am also the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church, and I'm running for U.S. Senate to save our democracy. Morgan has laid out for us what is at stake. And we are all Democrats up here, and most of us, we reflect the Democratic platform. So we will talk about climate, we will talk about healthcare, we will talk about equity, and we will talk about campaign finance reform. But I am really more concerned about restoring human dignity and decency to our democracy, protecting our democracy, and creating a sustainable future that we can all trust. When we look at how we value and what we lead with, that is part of why Cambridge Analytica was so successful, because they were able to take our values and use them against us.
If you've got cards with questions on them and you need to turn them in, hold up your hand and we'll pick them up. The next question, we will start with you, Donna. Ms. Bray. What are the biggest challenges to the Western Slope, and what specifically do you plan to do about it?
I think that the challenges for the Western Slope are very similar to the challenges that we have all over this country and all over this planet. I know that there are very, very serious issues here that are going to be, and people who are going to be impacted by climate change. We have a situation where there are literally going to be 200 million to 1 billion climate refugees, and it is going to be impacting everybody. In addition, specifically, the Western Slope is at risk of having significant oil and gas drilling as well. If fossil fuel extraction happens here, not only will people be affected by the egregious health and safety impacts, but you all will be punching above your weight in terms of the damage that is happening worldwide, planet-wide. So I do not want to see leasing of public lands on the Western Slope. There already has been leasing of public lands. I would like to see us moving away from selling our public lands to the highest bidder. I would like to see us be encouraging the organic farming. There is so much potential for that here, and I would like to find ways to incentivize the small family farm on the Western Slope, not contribute to an archaic way of getting our energy. We have wind here, we have solar, and I would like to incentivize those kinds of new technologies, because I think we are capable of that right here on the Western Slope.
So when I first contemplated getting into politics, I was lucky enough to meet with Roy Romer. Some of you are old enough to remember when he was governor. And he poked me in the chest and he said, you know, quality of life starts with a good job. And I think along the West Slope, especially, but throughout the whole state, that crucial issue around jobs is a great place to start any discussion, because it does lie at a root cause. One of the great things that's going on around here in the western part of the West Slope, so Montrose and Fruita and Grand Junction, is the diversification of the economy, the expansion of healthcare, which also ties into the economy, and the beginning to create a genuine integrated water plan. We created, while I was governor, we created a Colorado water plan. Everyone told me it was impossible. You'll never get everybody to agree. We did. We didn't get it all funded, but it's that foundation that allows us to begin looking at an outdoor recreation economy that mixes in with some of the traditional economies in the West Slope. And in that integration, it allows us to look at how do we expand healthcare. When we expanded Medicaid across the entire state, that became almost like an export in parts of the West Slope where we could provide medical care paid for by the state of Colorado or even by the federal government, and begin to see the economic benefits that come from making sure everyone gets basic health care. I think you got to tie all those together long term. Those are, I think, the primary issues.
So during my campaign, I've been touring around, as all of us have, and the three biggest things that have come up have been healthcare in the Western Slope, economies built on tourism and agriculture, and brain drain. We need to make sure that we are bringing in an economy. We need to make sure that what we need to do is bring in a healthcare system that is Medicare for all, single payer, that also is expanding the infrastructure of access to healthcare services like mobile clinics that are stationed in different parts of the Western Slope. The other thing is, with economies that are built on tourism, climate change can impact that and will impact that immensely. Because what brings tourism? Cars. What are we trying to do with addressing climate change? We're trying to make sure that we don't have a reliance on fossil fuel industry, which impacts cars. So we're going to have to figure out what are ways that we can address climate change without also significantly impacting and then negatively impacting the Western Slope and its tourism industry. And brain drain. Similar to what John was saying, we need to diversify economies so that students, when they leave to go to college, they're incentivized to come back and work where they were raised, where they grew up. Because otherwise, we are investing so much in educating our own folks and then sending them off to somewhere else. Thank you.
I think you're probably familiar with the saying in politics that all politics are local. And I want to say thank you for that question, because all of us up here we are from areas around Colorado that are in the Front Range. And so one of my things that I've been enjoying is getting around the state of Colorado and listening to the concerns of the Western Slope. Not just as I was running for United States Senate, but in these last 10 years when I've been working, trying to organize business leaders, law enforcement, faith leaders around the issue of immigration. And what I have been hearing consistently are these top three things. One is the workforce. We do not have the people that we need for the workforce, especially in the agricultural industry, which is why I think we need to really work on year-round agricultural visas and other areas around immigration reform. The second thing is housing. I thought affordable housing was just a problem in Denver, and what I realized is it's huge and statewide. Colorado families are in crisis, and this, like I said, it is all over the state of Colorado. 272,000 Colorado families are spending more than half of their paycheck on housing. This is not sustainable. That is barely surviving when you add it to the other issue that I continue to hear around healthcare. The Affordable Health Care Act was designed, or was supposed to be, creating an equal system for all. And what has happened in the state of Colorado with the implementation and redlining certain communities, especially in rural and mountain towns, is not right, and we need to make that right. Thank you.
It's good to be back in Montrose, and as shared, many of our issues are very similar because we have been here building and developing relationships with communities throughout the Western Slope. So again, it's good to be back. And you'll hear, as Democrats, we share very similar issues. protecting our public lands, right? And making sure that we are addressing climate crisis that's impacting the Western Slope. The first thing is to not let the Bureau of Land Management executive to actually come here. We need a new BLM manager. And again, we are grateful for the jobs that it might bring, but we are not so grateful for this individual who is selling off public lands to oil and gas. Additionally, when we talk about education, we just had a conversation, and I've been in higher education for, as I shared, 15 years, where at one point the state was paying the majority of public education, and now it's students who are paying the majority of public education. At UCCS, 7% of our budget comes from the state. Can we really call that public education? So we're experiencing the same kinds of things, to Lorena's point, that will create brain drain, that our children do not and they cannot afford to stay in the spaces and to work in the spaces that they have grown up in communities that we love. And lastly, healthcare, making sure that we have access and not just insurance for healthcare. Right now, telemedicine and creating opportunities for healthcare providers to be on the Western Slope is something that we continue to talk about.
To pick up where Stephany left off, I had a conversation not long ago with a woman I met in Ridgeway who pointed out that folks on the Western Slope are paying higher health insurance premiums than anywhere in America. She said, even if I pay these premiums, $500, $1,000 a month, I still face a $5,000 or $10,000 deductible, and even if I do that, there's no guarantee that the policy I'm paying for will actually be accepted by any provider I can find. I ran a mental health organization for the last 4 years, a group called Mental Health Colorado that aims to lead the fight for the prevention and treatment of mental health and substance use disorders. And I can tell you, I've met thousands of families all across Colorado who are not just frustrated, but agonized by the fact that insurance companies are charging them exorbitant rates, and there's no guarantee that they can actually do anything with the policies that aren't worth much more than the paper they're printed on. So if we're serious about tackling this problem, not just in the Western Slope, but across Colorado, we're going to have to stand up to the insurance industry and the drug companies that are bankrolling Congress and blocking reform. I wish I could tell you, as a Democrat, that our party was perfect and pure on this front. But the truth is, both parties have become seduced by the kind of special interest cash that courses through Washington. There's a reason these giant corporations make these campaign contributions. It's not the goodness of their heart. After all, they don't have hearts, despite what the Supreme Court might tell you. They're not people. It's because they get something in return. We need a democracy that's grounded in the people of Colorado again.
Increase in real value of the minimum wage is 21% since 1990. In that same time period, cost of living has gone up 67%. For each 1% increase in the top 20%, the economy contracts 8%. The middle class in Colorado has declined 6.4% since 2000. 6.4% since 2000. Some of the most extreme income and wealth inequality in Colorado is happening on the Western Slope. What specifically will you do to address this issue? Start with Hickenlooper.
You give me the question, the hard, complex question to start with. So this is something not just in the West Slope, but across Colorado and across this country. And we have to begin reconfiguring what we all agree to have a middle class that will grow. If the middle class continues to contract, we will not be able to continue to have democracy for obvious reasons. So just quick cookbook type solutions. We have a thing called the Earned Income Tax Credit. We should double that on a federal level. We almost doubled it while I was governor on the state level to make sure that people that are working get more in their income. We have to, on a graduated way, and in a way that respects regional differences, increase the minimum wage. That's got to be a basic part of this. We've got to make sure that the working families are able to, again, not just be able to have health care, but have child care and quality early childhood education, so that when they're off working, they don't feel like their kids are getting left behind. I think we also have to look at the skills and training and education we provide our kids. Obviously, we've got to lower the cost of college. There should be no 8 or 9% loans for college debt. It's crazy. We should also look at all the kids that aren't going to go to college. 65% of our kids aren't going to get a 4-year degree. And we started things like apprenticeships and skills-based training through our community college that have to be expanded widely and broadly across this state, but also make sure that they become national policy.
Okay, you ready? On the count of 3, Lorena Garcia. 1, 2, 3. Lorena Garcia. Great, thank you. All right, so number 1, I agree with John, we have to raise minimum wage. Unfortunately, I disagree that we can't raise it in a slow, gradual way. Right now, we are already slowly, gradually raising our minimum wage in Colorado. By the time it actually gets to what we voted on, is that even going to be, is that even going to matter anymore? No, because the cost of living continues to increase faster. So what we need to do is we need to get to a $15 minimum wage immediately while the government helps to subsidize what that's going to do to small business. The next thing that we have to do, especially in communities in the Western Slope and the Eastern Plains, is the Green New Deal. The Green New Deal, I'm 100% in support of the Green New Deal. And what that's going to do is it's going to bring high-paying, safe energy jobs to Colorado, rooted in renewable energies. And in order to make that happen, we have to make sure that we also create systems that are going to allow students to get trained quickly to be able to take on these jobs. So in that, I also propose that we bring in tuition-free higher education that includes vocational and tech schools. And while we're at it, cancel student debt. Thank you.
Every year we continue to hear that the middle class and the working class is disappearing. As we see that the wealth divide continue to grow over and over again, which is why equity issues are one of my top 3 priority issues. I've already talked a little bit about the need around affordable housing and healthcare, but I want to just say that a report just came out this last week that shared that Trump's tax cuts benefited the rich and the upper class the most. Big shock. What we also saw when you drill down with the numbers that 400 of the richest families in the United States of America actually paid a lower tax percentage than the working class. The first thing we need to do is reverse those tax breaks for the wealthy. Secondly, we need to really invest in education. Economists who are not known for being the most liberal people in the world say that the 2 most important investments that we can make to bring the wealth gap together is education and healthcare. We need to look at our education in very serious lens. You never stop paying for a cheap education. And we need to really take it seriously. The federal government does very little around K-12 education and really needs to increase and up not only its financial investment, but also just the mindset that our economy and our country is best when we are educated.
So I also agree. The Green New Deal is something that we have to move forward with and move forward aggressively. Why? Because it is going to create job infrastructure across the country, but specifically here in Colorado because we have so much access to renewable energy sources. So when we think about having to build even a national grid for maintaining the viability of getting energy from renewable sources, why can't it start here in Colorado? So I'm an advocate for the Green New Deal and the job creation that this will provide for us here in Colorado. Additionally, the way in which we structure education is extremely problematic. We have bought into a narrative that college is it. And so we have failed on vocational training and entrepreneurship through K through 12. I believe that when students come out of high school, they should be able to walk into a viable career, whether they decide to go to college or not. And so if that means getting technical training, associate degrees in conjunction with their high school diplomas, then that is the work that we have to do to make sure that our young people are employable, and to also, again, marrying that with the Green New Deal, that the jobs actually exist once they are leaving high school.
Well, if we're serious about growing an economy that works for everyone, we need to remind some of the folks who make these decisions in Denver that the map of the state doesn't end at the Eisenhower Tunnel. When I was the Speaker of the House, I spent a lot of time here on the Western Slope, and I want to just share with you a story. Kerry Kennedy was the state treasurer, and thanks for that, Chair. Kerry and I spent a lot of time visiting schools throughout rural Colorado, schools where the roofs were caving in, or the floorboards were too rotten to hold up a desk. We visited kids who were sent to study in trailers that had been parked outside the school buildings and designated as temporary instructional facilities, but trailers that were still there 30 years later. Hard to call them temporary at that point. And I remember in particular a conversation we had with one young woman we met in the San Luis Valley. She was embarrassed by the conditions where she was sent to study, and she turned to Kerry and me, and she said, "How come you don't care as much about me and kids like me as you do about kids back in Denver or wherever you're from?" I thought, you deserve a better answer to that question. So Kerry and I marched back to the state capitol, put together a $1 billion plan to repair and rebuild schools throughout the state in some of the most remote and low-income communities. We did that not because the young women we met in the San Luis Valley had made a contribution to our campaign, but because we decided that the quality of your education should not depend on your zip code or your bank account. If you want to invest in education, that's the best way to grow the economy of this state.
My husband and I and our kids moved to Colorado in 2000. My husband wanted to move here. And I don't think I was brave enough, actually. I think that I anticipated the challenges of what it's like to live in a place like this, how absolutely glorious it is, but also how challenging. How is it that we have come to the place where 3 people in this country has the same wealth as the bottom 50%? How is it? I don't think that we have been able to grapple and understand the enormity of this and what has happened over time, but also all of our complicity in that. We have to support candidates and politicians who are willing to be bold. What does that mean? Support an increase in the minimum wage and do it quickly. Abolish, cancel student debt. Invest in rural hospitals. Invest in education in every community. Stop the privatization of public schools. Stop benefiting the top 1%. Stop giving them subsidies and giveaways to continue their corporate projects that diminish us all. Those are the things that I propose for here and all over Colorado.
According to NASA, we are less than 12 years away from our current, before our current type of life here on planet Earth is irreversible. What specifically will you do about it?
Okay, Green New Deal. That is what we need to do. It is a brilliantly written out roadmap to get us to a place where we can not only save our planet, but also fix our economy so that it works for everybody. Within that, we need to ban fracking, and we need to do that immediately. The other thing that we need to do, we have to invest heavily in research and development to make sure that we can create the technology needed to be able to store solar power, to store wind energy, so that when it's nighttime, we can still be powering our houses. So we need to invest heavily in research and development. The other thing we need to do is we need to protect our oceans. Without saving our oceans, and even as a non-coastal state, we need to care about our oceans. Because if we are overfishing our oceans, then we are destroying the ecology in our oceans. So we need to ban overfishing. The other thing is we also need to make sure that within our trade agreements, that we need to work on making sure that whatever company that we bring in, that we trade with back and forth, is done with companies that are also committed to 100% renewable energy. We all, each and every one of us in this room, are also going to have to make significant sacrifices if we intend to change the course that is set before us. And that means we have to take action as well. Thank you.
When I think of all that we face with our climate, not only do I think the word crisis is appropriate, but I really believe that we need to back that up, not with just this lip service, but the sense of urgency that puts strong public policy in place. I'm a mother. I have a 23-year-old, a 21-year-old, and a 17-year-old. So when I look into the future, I don't just think about my future. And I'm sure we don't think about just our future, but the future that we're leaving for the generations of our kids and our kids' kids. This is a crisis. This is a paramount issue that we need to engage. That's why number 2 on my top 3 priorities is transitioning our energy economy. If we're going to have a serious conversation at how we're going to address the climate crisis, we need to come up with good energy sources that are both carbon-free and carbon-neutral, as well as good solutions to ensure that those sources are being able to benefit us in our energy production. I aggressively want to see coal phased out, and I think we need to continue to move away from the fossil fuel industry. But I also understand that it helps us with our jobs and our economies, and so that's why we need to be very smart when we transition. There's 2 things. One is an energy park. Apparently I only have 10 seconds, and that's way too much to tell you in 10 seconds. But energy park, much like an industrial park, really would allow multi-types of energy. It would create jobs as well as the energy we need, and then high-speed rail.
When I was a little girl, as gendered as this might be, I dreamt of nothing more than becoming a mother. My career, my life has not allowed that yet, but as I look at where I am today and what we are facing, I don't even know if bringing children into this world is a wise thing to do. And there are many young people who are making that decision, who desperately want to have children. So part of me is heartbroken, and the other part is angry, because what we are dealing with, the fossil fuel industry knew about 50 years ago, and they sold us a lie. So on top of supporting the Green New Deal, I know that we have to end the subsidies to the fossil and oil industry. We cannot continue to pay corporations to destroy our planet. We also have to hold them accountable, because there is no point in being angry if we are not going to have a course of action to channel that energy. So we have to hold them accountable by taking them to court, civilly and criminally, to make them pay for what they knew 50 years ago.
There's a student here from Colorado Mesa. There may be more than one. I was talking to Dawson on the way in, and we've been talking to students across the state, inspired by the leadership they're bringing, demonstrating more courage than the adults in Washington who are supposed to be making these decisions. I pointed that out on one of the campuses we visited, and one of the students looked at me and he said, "Yeah, no kidding, Grandpa." He actually said Grandpa, but that was the sentiment. He said, "We're going to be here longer than you are." So we ought to take some courage from their convictions. And as Stephany just said, the subsidies we're providing now, $650 billion a year in direct and indirect subsidies to oil and gas and coal. We're paying polluters. We ought to be spending that money instead in the research and development and construction of a clean energy infrastructure in solar and wind and renewables, and we ought to make sure that the folks whose jobs are already being dislocated by this shift get the assistance and support they need to take new jobs in the clean energy industry. I had a conversation with some pipe fitters who are working in many cases in oil and gas fields. They didn't ask me whether the climate crisis was a hoax, because unlike the president, they know it's not. Instead, what they asked was, will you help us so that we don't have to lose the ability to support our families or pay our rent or our mortgage? Will you help us get good jobs? And I said yes. We should say yes. We should not treat anyone as collateral damage or a casualty of this crisis. We ought to recognize, as Colorado is doing right now at long last, that you can grow the economy and protect the environment at the same time.
This is my obsession. I go to sleep thinking about the climate crisis. I wake up thinking about the climate crisis. I've been working on it, as I said earlier, for 10 years. The Greenland ice sheet was melting at the equivalency of 400 million swimming pools a day this past summer. If the Greenland ice sheet melts completely, then sea level rise will be 20 feet. The humanitarian and the catastrophic disaster that will happen will be beyond what we can possibly imagine. As I said earlier, many peoples will be displaced, and places like Bangladesh and the Bahamas will be completely swamped. No one will be immune. So what do we have to do? We have to stop drilling on public lands. We have to stop exporting fossil fuels. We have to support the Green New Deal. We have to ban fracking. I know that this is often thought of as an extreme measure. What's extreme is that we've changed the atmosphere. We've actually changed the chemistry of the atmosphere, and we've created something where if we do not reverse course, within 10 years, we will have basically created such irreparable damage that there will be no return. We have to be very, very bold, and we have to find a way to elect people who will not be continually supporting the fossil fuel industry, but will be supporting people, and we can move to a green energy technology. We can do it. We will do it. We need to stop corporate welfare.
Climate change is the single greatest threat to humanity in the history of the planet. People forget that I've got a master's in geology, I always called it. It's actually in earth and environmental science. And back in 1979, when I got that degree, we were talking about climate change. I am committed to what we call 100 by 50, to reduce carbon emissions on a net zero basis 100% by 2050. And to accelerate that wherever possible. We've got to rejoin the Paris Accords, but go beyond that. We've got to look at what we've done in Colorado as a model and recognize that we're going to create jobs in the process. It was funny, I came in today, I saw the paper, and I got an op-ed in the paper today on this very issue. We're closing 2 coal plants in Pueblo right now. We're replacing them with wind, solar, and batteries, no natural gas, and we're replacing every job down there, the job that pretty close, within 10% is paying the same as the jobs that are going to end up going away. We also have to recognize that we are focusing our attention on things that are going to allow this transition to a clean energy economy efficiently. So we took some of our Volkswagen diesel fraud money, put it into beginning a network of rapid recharging stations for electric vehicles, crucially important. Colorado was the first state in the country to create methane regulations. Methane, when they flare it, it's 80 times worse than CO2 for climate change. But I'll leave you with, I agree, we should. It was a major, only state in the country that got that done. We should recognize that everything we do here is a model for what has to happen in the world. Ultimately, what we've done in Colorado will help save the world.
We're going to move it a little bit. I'm going to take a question from the audience, but we'll go ahead and do 90 seconds for this one as well. Folks of color make up about 30% of America, yet we make up about 70% of folks who are incarcerated. We have the highest incarceration rates in the world, and mixed with that is incarceration of undocumented residents and deportation. So what specifically are you going to do to change the incarceration rates and mass incarceration, as well as help those folks who are undocumented?
For the last 26 years, I have lived in majority communities of color. Racialized policing and mass incarceration is my community's reality. So much so that my 21-year-old wanted to finish college as fast as he could so he could be a public defender, because as being one of the only white kids in his community, he recognized he had a certain kind of privilege because of the color of his skin, but because he understood the true injustice, wanted to step in and do everything he could alongside his community. There are three things, although there are a host of things, and I would invite you to go to my website at michelleforcolorado.com and see what I have to say about criminal justice reform and mass incarceration. There's three things that I would like to propose for sure. One is that we need to end the private prison industry. The reality is that it is unconstitutional. The fact that we trade people's future as a commodity on the stock exchange is shameful. Also, we need to end immigrant detention. It is not okay for us to incarcerate moms and dads for broken taillights and unleashed dogs. We have a prison system that can protect us from people who would do harm. Our undocumented community is not that group of people. Additionally, we need to end cash bail. It's not okay to incarcerate, especially single moms who just can't, they're too poor to pay for bail. Another thing that we need to do is stop. Well, there's a lot to say that we need to do on justice.
I grew up on the south side of Chicago, which in many ways feels like almost every urban city in the United States. My nephew, at 8 years old, came to me, a brilliant mind, was writing poetry, and we were out, I'd taken him out to an open mic, and he told me the poem that he presented, I had not read it before he presented it on the mic, and it was about him knowing that he would go to prison one day, at 8 years old. My nephew is 24, and he just got out of prison last week. So this is not theoretical for me. It is really about the lives of my family and my community. We have to stop private prisons. We also have to stop the school to prison pipeline. Brown and black children at the age of 4 are being put into the injustice system here in Colorado at exorbitant rates. In 2017, black men were 28 times more represented in prison here in Colorado. So ending the school to prison pipeline, stop the privatization of prisons, and also to stop the detention of immigrants. I have been to the border, and working on this issue is very connected to my own experience, again, as an African American woman here in the United States.
I had a conversation with a young woman here in Montrose not long ago at a coffee shop. She, like my own cousin, was adopted from Central America. This is the only country she's ever known. But when she went to school here in Colorado, her classmates told her to go back where she came from. They told her, don't bother going to school at all. You're not going to be anything more than a maid. I don't know whether the bullies she met at her classroom here in Colorado took their cue from the President of the United States, but they might well have. When we allow the Commander-in-Chief to describe our neighbors as rapists and criminals, to suggest opening fire on migrant families, cage children, and tear families apart, to demonize immigrants and refugees, to describe asylum as a hoax, and declare the country full, we should not be surprised when some of his most extreme supporters take the hint and act out in violence. Donald Trump didn't invent bigotry in America, but he has legitimized it and weaponized it, and it's going to take a long time to recover from this administration. So we need comprehensive immigration reform, we need racial justice in our criminal justice system, and we need women and men in the U.S. Senate in particular who will stand up to the racism that's dripping from the lips of the President of the United States.
The most egregious harm that I believe that this administration has done, supported by Cory Gardner and people like Cory Gardner who are now in power, is the fostering and promotion of white power and white nationalism. I believe that we have got to find a way to support the people who are already in this country. I would like to see immigration reform. I would like to see a pathway to citizenship for all those folks who are already here. And as most of us here in this room are descendants of people who essentially came here as immigrants, I think we need to find a way to respect immigrants. We also have to acknowledge the racial injustice that goes back 400 years. We have to find a way to stop the school to prison pipeline. And we have to acknowledge our complicity in all of that. I am informed by Ta-Nehisi Coates and Julian Laveau, who said, if we are here, we have benefited from the enslavement of others, and that has to be acknowledged. If we are able to get to a place of that acknowledgement and even go further, we have a chance for our democracy. Thank you.
This is really two questions. I'll try and push through them. First, we have to change sentencing. And one good example is the war on drugs, where we send hundreds of thousands, literally millions of kids, largely kids of color, to prison for nonviolent crimes. And that's got to be changed. But we also got to recognize those people that are in prison. When we're about to release them, we've got to make sure that they have skills and do everything we can to make sure they've got job opportunities, so when they come out, they don't find themselves in a hopeless situation and reoffend and get right back into prison. We see that over half the time on a general rule. I think we also have to address police reform. When I first became mayor of Denver in 2003, and I'd never run for student council. I came in green. 2 weeks after I came in, before I was inaugurated, 2 weeks after I got elected, a 15-year-old African-American kid got shot in his own front hall. It's the 5th police officer kid or police officer shooting in that previous 6 months. I worked with the black ministers in Metro Denver to create major police reform, Civilian Oversight Commission, Office of the Independent Monitor to look at instances of police brutality, all of that stuff. Now I've left my 10 seconds for immigration. Comprehensive immigration reform. Let's start with a 10-year visa so no one gets locked up for being undocumented. Make sure that they have a pathway to citizenship.
All right, Lorena Garcia. 1, 2, 3. Lorena Garcia. Okay, I'm a 7th-generation Coloradan. My dad's family, sitting right here, grew up in the San Luis Valley. I'm also a 1st-generation Coloradan because my mom is from Mexico. My wife's family is from Mexico. This is hugely important to me because, just like Stephany said, it's personal. This stems from the systemic racism that we have in this country that goes from our political system of why we have hardly any people of color or women in the U.S. Senate. It extends to why we have police brutality, and why is it that when cops shoot black men, they're still put on the street a week later while there's not even a court case hearing yet. We have to do better. We have to abolish ICE, decriminalize border crossing. We have to get rid of private prisons, and not only get rid of private prisons, but actively work to reduce the prison population by bringing in restorative justice. And second, we cannot elect candidates that promoted the growth of prisons in Colorado during their term. You cannot elect candidates that ushered anti-immigrant policy during their term. We need to do our research of the candidates that you see up here today. Thank you.
60 seconds. The next one. What structural changes would you lead the charge on to reform the Senate to make it better serve the people? Start with Ms. Spaulding.
I think Lorena just hit it on the head. Structurally, you have to elect a woman and people of color. We do not have representation that reflects the United States. And we will never have the kind of leadership that we need if we don't elect candidates. You have an opportunity. There's not a person up here who isn't qualified. There's not a person. So choose wisely. Do a new course that will structurally change what happens in Congress, starting with the Senate. Additionally, we have to end the filibuster. But I'm more passionate about electing women and people of color to the office.
I'll support any of the candidates on this stage for the Democratic nomination, should they become the nominee, and support them wholeheartedly against Cory Gardner, and I'll ask you to do the same. I'm running for this job because I believe I'd be the most effective legislative leader from Colorado to represent us in the U.S. Senate, and you don't have to take my word for it. You could ask the 50 different state and national organizations that recognize my leadership, or the 300 county commissioners and mayors and school board members and city council members and legislators who have all endorsed my campaign. They're not all Democrats, I will tell you. One of the endorsements that makes me proudest came from the other side of the aisle. A colleague of mine named Mike May, who was the minority leader in the House, endorsed me a few weeks after I joined this race. He's a Republican. I said to him, "Thanks, Mike, but I'm a Democrat." He said, "I know, but my country matters more than my party. We would be honored to call you our senator." What we need in the U.S. Senate are folks who understand that our country comes first, not just to end the filibuster and prevent these backroom deals, but to actually give the people of Colorado and the rest of the country the representation they're not getting from Mitch McConnell and Cory Gardner right now.
The way that we're going to change the Senate is to be bold and also to consider not supporting folks who are supported by the insurance companies, the NRA, the oil and gas industry, the insurance companies, and big corporate interests. As long as our Senate and politicians are bought, they are compromised. So you all have an incredible opportunity, and as others here have said, I will also support whoever is the candidate, but support means different things. And we are not the most vulnerable people here in the United States. If you all and the rest of the population do not make very bold decisions, then we are going to be in very, very deep, deep trouble, as we have been these last few years. So I encourage you to consider who you think is best positioned to take out Cory Gardner and what they're going to do once they get to the Senate. Thanks so much.
So first, I think we have to look at how do we get dark money out of politics. Our campaign is not going to take any corporate money, no PAC money at all. We have to figure out how to limit their influence. I think one way, in addition just to defining it through legislation or curtailing it through legislation, is that we should require, and I understand there are going to be huge waves of opposition from Congress, but once you join Congress, you should take a pledge not to lobby for 10 years. Let's not have a whole class of people taking their money from their public service. I think that's a huge part. And then let's get rid of the filibuster. I don't mind someone who wants to stand up there and speak for 4 days straight or 6 days straight. That's a level of endurance that shows a commitment. But this kind of armchair, well, we're just going to make sure we have a group filibuster here, make sure nothing gets passed, which is what Mitch McConnell and Cory Gardner have done, is outrageous.
So I agree with what's been said, so I won't repeat it. What I'm going to focus on is a structural change in our government needs to happen also at the Supreme Court level. Because as all of you in this room know, like I mentioned earlier, what's happening in our court system is all of these really regressive policies are being taken up through the court system through lawsuits, so that way they can reverse Roe v. Wade, they can reverse gay marriage, they can get in the way of voting rights. So what we need to do if we want to protect any level of the court case of the case law that exists now for each and every one of us, we have to stack the court and go from 9 judges to 11 judges, because we cannot wait an entire generation before we can reclaim objectivity in our Supreme Court.
I want to continue to go on the same bandwagon as far as diversity of representation. That's one of the reasons that I jumped in this race. I am proud of the history of Colorado and how it led the country in allowing the women the right to vote 27 years before the federal government. Wyoming was the first territory, but Colorado was the first state. And we followed that up the next year with sending 3 women to Colorado's General Assembly. We knew before the federal government and the rest of the country that the voices of women was going to make a difference. Yet I am mystified how 126 years later, 8 of our 9 congressional representatives are men. So I want to make sure that, of course, we have more representation of women. I can't miss an opportunity to say that we need to change, that we need to flip the Senate, we need to get rid of Mitch McConnell, we need to get rid of Cory Gardner, and then finally we need to really talk about campaign finance reform and money in our entire legislative process. Fun fact, $14,000 a day is how much each senator needs to raise to stay in office. That's a problem.
Okay, the audience wants to know, by show of hands, has Trump committed an impeachable offense? Seconds for the next question. What will you do to lower the cost of higher education?
I'll start by telling you what I've done, what we've done, because we met with a lot of folks here in the Western Slope and throughout the state when Colorado fell to 49th in the nation in public support for higher education. That was the ranking we had when I became Speaker of the House. I suppose the good news is when you fall to 50th, there's really only one direction you can go. We were hemorrhaging jobs to other states that figured out educating your workforce is a pretty good economic development strategy. So we worked across the aisle. I know this will sound like a fairy tale, so indulge me for just a moment. But we found an ally on the first floor of the Capitol, a Republican governor, who teamed up with us to fix a flaw in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, shore up support for schools and colleges and healthcare and human services, build the broadest coalition the state has ever seen. 1,000 organizations signed on and passed that measure. It's still the only fix we've made to Tabor since 1992 when it was adopted. You'll have a chance to extend that solution this year, but we've got to recognize that the workforce of Colorado, the kids who represent our future, are the single best economic development investment we can ever make, and they deserve the chance not just to be better test takers and widget makers, but full human beings.
I'm from Washington, D.C., and my mother teaches at age 86 full-time as a professor at George Washington University, and she teaches education policy. She also wrote a book last year on charter schools, and she's not a fan. She's actually in Colorado with my father, who's 89, but it was too big for them to take this trip here. I talk to her constantly about education, and I'm informed by her. This is what she has said to me. She's considered a guru in terms of higher education. She says that, number 1, we need to increase Pell Grants. Number 2, we need to cancel student debt. Number 3, the most important thing that we can do, and she's not a huge advocate of this for everybody, but she believes, and I believe, that offering state education for free would be a pathway for many people. So there are many things that we can do better than what we are doing right now, and I'm hoping that we will get to that point soon.
So 2 things, obviously, I already said we should double the size of Pell Grants. That's a beginning. We have to go back to 1980, and you will see, as you look at how states fiscally operate, they have spent more and more and more of their budget on healthcare. We're the only industrialized nation where the individual communities spend such a large proportion of their resources on healthcare. And as we've done that, we spend less and less on higher ed. So let's make sure the federal government does its fair share of taking a larger part of our healthcare costs. I think we also have to look at those kids that don't want to, for whatever reason, don't want to go to college and don't want to get a 4-year degree. That's, over the last several decades, roughly 2/3 of our kids. And we've started in Colorado. It's now a national model of apprenticeships, which are very powerful, allow kids to go out and work for 2 days the first year, then 3 days, and then 4 days the third year. But also, we have something called skillful.com to make sure that kids can learn skills throughout the entire arc of their professional life and keep acquiring skills to be ready for the new professions that evolve.
We currently spend as a country $92 billion in higher ed subsidies, including Pell Grants. And we still have students coming out of the system with an insane amount of student debt. If we shifted to a tuition-free higher education program in public-funded institutions, we will only be spending $78 billion. That's a cost savings, and it expands access to students across the board, not only to the limited few that already have enough privilege to be able to get through high school, to be able to then apply for the Pell Grant and get it. We need to look at higher education through a lens of equity. And when we do that, we have to consider the wholeness of the student. That means we need to consider what was their upbringing, what were they going through high school. I graduated with a 2.7 from high school, but yet I still went on to get an MBA from George Washington, and I never would have qualified for a Pell Grant.
I am a 48-year-old woman, and I have friends to this day that still have school loan debt. That wasn't my story. I came from a family that was able to pay for my college. I just put 2 kids through college, and I have a senior in high school right now. This is a very real issue that we need to address, especially when we look down the road to the 21st century, recognizing that we are going to need more students that have bachelor's degrees. I agree with mentorships and programs. I agree with a lot of things that were said here, so I just want to take my time to share a couple other complimentary things. Last year, $2.6 billion in FAFSA went unused. That's incredibly concerning. I think the cost for higher education is so huge that people don't even think that it's possible, and so they don't even apply. Why? The federal government, who houses the IRS, that takes the safe information for the FAFSA, we can't just press one button and tell people and tell young people this is how much you would get in FAFSA. That is missing an opportunity to educate people.
I have a PhD. I've been in higher education for how many years now? 15 years, and I'm still paying student loan debt. We have to cancel student loan debt. When we talk about FAFSA, the reason that 2 whatever billion is still there because they're loans, and students don't want loans anymore. So we have to make sure that we are moving to a tuition-free education, and we can do it. Again, being here in higher education in Colorado, what we can do is offer in our public institutions the opportunity to not only get educated, but then to commit to working in the community where you got educated. So that it is an investment into the private and public sector for the jobs that we know are coming. The last part is to decrease the amount of money that has gone to administration in our higher education system. It's not going to teacher salary, it's not going to programs, it's going to people who run institutions and bureaucratic costs.
I thought we could start. Great. Everyone answers yes. Okay. In 1960, the American healthcare industry was worth $24.7 billion. Today it's worth $3.5 trillion. 1.4 million Americans went overseas for medical care in 2017 to get a better deal. What is your specific plan to address this healthcare crisis? Ms. Bray.
As I said earlier, I'm a huge proponent for a single-payer Medicare for all system, and I think we have to move toward this system if we want to look after the majority of people in this country. Right now, there are 30 million people who don't have access to health care, and another 50 million people who are underinsured. 500,000 people go bankrupt every single year from health costs. We have such enormous costs that we can't afford to be healthy. We can't afford to go for preventative care. And I believe that our current system is one that only serves people of privilege. If you can pay those premiums, if you can pay those co-pays, then you can survive in this system. And that's a very, very small percentage. I think that the insurance companies have a stranglehold on us. We're golden handcuffed. If you're in a union, you can't leave your job. If you do, then your children lose their insurance, your entire family loses their insurance. If you're laid off, or if you just decide that you're going to try to do something else, no, you lose your insurance. I believe that we need medical care, we need health care that's not attached to our jobs. And yes, unlike Elizabeth Warren, I'm willing to say taxes will go up, a very small amount, and it will be significantly less than what we have to pay in outlay costs. It will be a much better system. Other countries have done it, we can do it too.
Healthcare is a right and not a privilege. And I helped start, a friend of mine was starting a community health center in Middletown, Connecticut, where I was in college in 1973. And that facility now has 220 locations all across the state of Connecticut on a sliding scale. No cliff effect like we sometimes see with Medicaid to keep people from getting a better job. In terms of controlling costs, I think they are part of the solution. I know you've got a community health center here. You still have a nonprofit hospital. In many ways, you are somewhat protected, and yet you've been grouped in by the insurance companies into this mountain rural healthcare group that makes sure that you pay the highest costs. Looking at more specifically, how do someone going to Washington change the spikes in healthcare costs? Let's start with prescription drugs. And why is it that the United States is the only industrialized country where we are not able to negotiate for bulk discounts for our major programs, right? Like Medicare. That would be a dramatic way to bring down, so you wouldn't have to pay so much for these miracle drugs like insulin. Let the rest of the world pay their share to developing miracle drugs. Transparency. Let's make sure that you can see when you go to a hospital or a clinic what's going to cost, what's your copay going to be, what's their quality. Transparency in delivery, making sure we control prescription drugs, and then making sure we have universal coverage will go a long way.
My team and I were out knocking doors yesterday, and I met a gentleman who said to me that he wasn't paying attention to very much of anything right now because he has been ill and in pain for so many years. And when you're in that state, the only thing you care about is feeling better. He then told me that his medical bills were so outrageous that he had to sell his house to afford his medical bills. I had a small little incident. I broke my finger. My wife and I were on the way to the hospital so she could get physical therapy. And I was insisting, no, I'm not going to go to the doctor. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Because even if I have health insurance, and I have yet to receive my bill, and I'm scared to death of how much I'm going to have to pay for a stupid little pinky. We need single-payer health care, and I think Medicare for All is the way to get there. We can do it by transitioning into single-payer, by first addressing our health care costs. We, as United States of America, should not be paying 4 times more than Finland for an MRI machine that's the same machine. We should not be paying 25 times more for a CAT scan in Mexico using the same machine. We need to get our healthcare costs under control, and we can no longer allow CEOs and big pharma to make money off of people with diabetes and cancer and broken pinkies.
Our healthcare system is not working for America, it's not working obviously for Coloradans, it's not working for you all, and it's not working for me. I too was going to share a really personal story. I actually have life-threatening food allergies. And what that means is that you go into the emergency room, you don't just spend a little bit, which is an astronomical amount, but it's life-threatening. So it goes up to the 10 level of care. And I have sat there taking Benadryl and using albuterol in my car in the parking of the emergency room just because I knew I could not afford it. People should not be doing that with their life. They should not be risking their life because even the health care they have is too expensive to be able to get the care that they need. There are a lot of different ways to address healthcare, and there is nothing adequate in 60 seconds. So I'm going to direct you to michelleforcolorado.com so you can check it out. One big thing that we need to really look at is the inefficiency in government. We can say that for a lot of things. But the fact that we have Medicare and Medicaid, we need to really streamline it and put them all together. Begin to phase out one in the benefit of the other. That's going to help our costs. It's going to help even the stigma around Medicaid. It's going to help with doctors and reimbursements. There's a lot that can be accomplished when we streamline it and put those two together. Also, the federal poverty guidelines only allows people who have less than $27,000 a year to be able to get Medicaid. We need to expand the qualifiers of the poor so more people can opt into that program. Thank you.
Single payer Medicare for all. We have to be able to make sure that every single person in the United States has access to care. Right now, the biggest cost that is driving healthcare up is one, that the cost is not standardized. What you pay for a appendix removal in one hospital is going to be different to the next hospital. The second is administrative costs. In private insurance, we're paying 12 to 18% in administrative costs, whereas in Medicare, it's about 3%. So administrative costs, just like in higher education, we are paying for bureaucracy. Lastly, and I don't think that this has come up before, is making sure that the options for care are not being privatized by religious institutions. And I say that as a pastor, because right now there are individuals who cannot get the care. The question pointed to people who are going elsewhere, out of the country or out of the state, out of their county, because they can't get the care that they want. Because there are religious institutions who are controlling and privatizing the health care in entire communities.
Most, but not all, of the candidates on this stage support Medicare for all. I know it's easy, though, to get lost in a conversation about the 28 million Americans who are uninsured or the 44 million who are underinsured. So I want to tell you briefly one story. When I was the president of Mental Health Colorado, I met a dad whose son had deep depression and then experienced a bout of psychosis, needed treatment. His dad's insurance plan, like most plans, was supposed to cover it. But when his dad submitted a claim, the insurance company said no. So the dad appealed the decision, and the company said no. And the dad appealed again, and the company said no. This went on for months, until his son killed himself at the age of 14. 3 weeks later, his dad got a letter in the mail from the insurance company reversing its decision and agreeing to cover his son's treatment. I will tell you, speaking not as a candidate, but as a human being, it's really hard for me to have conversations with moms and dads who have lost their kids, not only to a brain disease that we can treat, but also to the indifference of an industry that bases its profits on its ability to exclude as many sick people and deny as many claims as possible. That's the business model. And it's a great model if you're an insurance company. It's a lousy model for the rest of us. Instead of subsidizing that industry, we ought to put the extra $4,000 that we're spending each year on every American compared to other countries, put it into prevention and early intervention, put it into high-speed broadband infrastructure access so we can beam in providers to places like the Western Slope where they're often in short supplies. Let's invest in mental health and good quality medical care for every American, regardless of their ability to pay or their employment.
The audience wants to know, by a show of hands, will you use your political capital to preserve Roe v. Wade? The audience wants to know. Every year, we break a record in gun deaths. We've heard folks who are running for president, their ideas on mitigating gun violence. What is your specific plan to reduce gun violence?
So I know I talked directly to many people in this room when I describe firsthand what we've all experienced one way or another through the assault on our senses that happens every time you read about and view carnage from another shooting. I went to Aurora after the shooting in that movie theater and saw the first 3 people to look at the video of the crime scene and just to see what it looked like. And that obviously, we went out and did universal background checks. We got the majority in the state senate briefly. Some people have the majority longer. And we got universal background checks, limited magazine capacities. They've now expanded that and done red flag. But I think we are going to have to go farther and make sure that we are really going out and making sure that people that own guns, if you have to pass a driver's license test and are out there, well, we should make sure that people are trained and have the ability to handle and store firearms safely and make sure that that is a requirement of buying guns.
We have seen a 21% increase in domestic violence deaths due to guns from 2010 to 2017. Of that, the population that is most vulnerable are young Black women. When we talk about gun control, naturally, of course, we talk about the horrific, tragic mass shootings, but we also need to address the shootings that occur by handgun. We need universal background checks. We need waiting periods longer than 72 hours. We need to close the gun show loopholes. And we need to make sure we pass federal ERPO laws, because that is how we are going to do right by women. Thank you.
My family home is about 1.5 miles from Columbine, and I remember visiting the site and knew family members who had actually lost kids in that shooting. When the Aurora Theater shooting happened, one of my young mentees was in that theater and is still struggling with the trauma of what happened today. And this past spring, my nephew, who was taking his AP Physics exam, instead of just having to worry about the success of his grade, was actually in a closet because he was a part of the STEM school shooting. For Coloradans, this is deeply personal. And I agree with Lorena and agree with John on so many of the things that we can do, but the reality is we're doing nothing. I just want to push for something. Our children deserve a future. They deserve to be able to go to a school where they feel safe. And the lobbies of the NRA and Cory Gardner need to end. He needs to be removed from power because he doesn't even show compassion and concern and use his power for good.
Again, this is deeply personal for me. I am working right now in Colorado Springs on an issue with an officer-involved shooting, and that generally gets left out of the conversation. But right now, it is a leading cause of death for African American men. Officer-involved shootings. I've worked with Moms Demand Action across the state to help pass ERPO laws. I want to do that work federally, wanting to continue the work that we need to do in universal background checks, closing loopholes all throughout legislatively. But I also sit on the board of an organization called Raw Tools, Inc. And the work that we do is we take donated firearms and transform them into garden tools. but we also teach conflict resolution that is nonviolent. Because if we don't change the way in which we resolve issues, then we will always result to violence.
We're not supposed to answer this question, right? If you're a Democrat talking about guns on the Western Slope, I want to make sure we're saying the same thing to you that we're telling folks on the Front Range or every other part of Colorado, because the truth is, the only way we will get the gun safety legislation we need is if we take this case to every community in Colorado. We've been doing that in the course of my campaign in Delta, in Mesa, here in Montrose, in Ridgeway. I had a conversation with a rancher. He said, look, I own guns, I use guns, I collect guns, but I don't need an assault weapon. I'm not a bad shot. We need universal background checks, a ban on military-style assault weapons, and high-capacity magazines. And for me and my family, as you heard from others, this crisis is not simply statistical. It's profoundly personal. I lost one of the people I love most in the world to gun violence almost 5 years ago. My little cousin Melissa, who was like a kid sister to me, died by suicide on New Year's Day. Suicides account for 2/3 of gun deaths in America, and if we're serious about tackling this problem and reducing this death toll, we've got to make sure folks in those circumstances get the mental health care they need and aren't able to access the weapons they don't need in those positions.
31 years ago, I got my doctorate at University of Denver in clinical psychology. I did my dissertation on trauma and loss. This is deeply personal for me as well. We have a crisis of identity in this country. Tens of thousands of people commit suicide every year. We also have an opiate crisis. We are absolutely in dire straits now with what we're doing to our communities. We've managed to traumatize an entire country of children. Children are fearful to go to school. Their parents are fearful of dropping them off. The drills themselves are frightening and traumatizing. I'm advocating for the strictest gun law, violence prevention imaginable. All the things that were mentioned here, IRCO, closing loopholes, universal background checks, registration, and a 10-day waiting period. When you look at California, they've reduced gun violence the most. They have a 10-day waiting period. We have to take extreme measures. Now is not the time for being safe or cautious. Extreme gun violence prevention measures.
From the audience, how can I respond to a friend who says that Cory Gardner has reached across the aisle and has even been pro-environment? And I think I start with Michelle.
I don't even need 60 seconds. So let's just practice my name. Ready? Count of 3. It's Lorena Garcia on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Lorena Garcia. Cory Gardner has voted 93% of the time perfectly in line with Donald Trump. Every single vote has been against the environment. That is how.
When I introduced myself this morning, I said I've spent the last 10 years working alongside Congress. And Cory Gardner has been somebody that I have been working alongside, at least his office, trying to build coalitions of thousands of conservatives, unaffiliates, liberals, people from his district, to try to convince him that he actually has the political coverage to make those hard choices. Not only is Cory Gardner not reaching across the aisle, but when those of us who are building coalitions across the aisle are helping him have courage to vote on imperative issues, he still isn't acting in anybody else's personal or I'll just say he hasn't acted on his own interests and not on the interests of others. Sorry, I have so much feeling about Cory Gardner, which is one of the reasons I have jumped into this race. He has been power grabbing since he left college. He's exactly where he's always wanted to be with the RNC, and that is not the kind of person that we want representing us in the Senate.
As shared, we can look at his voting record that has aligned with Donald Trump at 93%. But we can also look at his League of Conservation Voter scorecard that, again, he has failed to do anything that protects our environment. But then we can also look to the Denver Post and the rescinding of their endorsement. I have never, and maybe I'm just too young, but I have never seen a newspaper, a national acclaimed newspaper, rescind an endorsement midway through someone's tenure because they have failed to be who they said they would be when they were running for office. Now, we got a lot of people in Congress who have lied on the campaign trail. But again, I have never seen publicly the national media saying, you have lied so much, we can no longer endorse you.
Well, I'm the only person on this stage. Morgan's the other person in the room who served with Cory Gardner. We spent 4 years in the legislature together, and I got to know him so well that I had a chance to impersonate him. When Betsy Markey, a congresswoman from Northern Colorado, was running for re-election in 2010, she invited me up to play Cory in her debate prep sessions. I told her it was the easiest assignment I've ever had. You just get to smile and make things up. So I disagree with Cory on every major issue of public policy, but the good news is, in this race, even a generic Democrat is now leading Cory Gardner by 10 points. What I'd suggest you demand when the person you send into battle with Cory Gardner next fall is more than a generic Democrat. You ought to elect somebody who brings the courage of our convictions. Replace Cory Gardner with a climate champion, someone who will turn down contributions from the fossil fuel industry and stand up to big oil, big gas, and fight for the interests of ordinary Coloradans. That's what I've done, it's what I aim to do, and I hope I'll earn your support as Cory Gardner's replacement.
As a mother, I take incredible offense at the actions of Cory Gardner and the way that he has endorsed and promoted caging children. As a clinical psychologist, I am so incredibly concerned about the divisiveness that he has encouraged, us versus them, supporting people who have power over people who are more vulnerable. And as a climate advocate, it is absolutely heartbreaking what this administration has done, the rollbacks of protections. We need our government to be more protective, and that is not happening in this administration. The way that I see Cory Gardner and all the Republican group, it's like they're in a big sandbox, and Trump is building his sandcastles and then destroying everyone else's sandcastles. Mitch McConnell's throwing sand in everybody's eyes, but Cory Gardner, he's interesting. He's sitting on the side as the collaborator, the facilitator, and that's what his role has been, in my opinion, in this administration.
It's funny that we've said his name so infrequently. I think it's just because we get numb and shell-shocked to saying it again and again and again. Much nicer to say a name like Lorena Garcia. Cory Gardner doesn't believe that background checks serve a purpose. He supports Mitch McConnell in wanting to keep that discussion off the floor of the Senate. In other words, he's against background checks that over 90% of Coloradans support. He will be the first U.S. Senator from Colorado in either party not to sponsor any expansion of wilderness. And you step back and think about what that means to the things we believe in, it's incredible. He wants to dismantle the Affordable Care Act. He wants to remove the protections that we have now for people with pre-existing medical conditions. And let me say, and I agree so much with so many people up here, do not underestimate Cory Gardner. It's going to be very hard. It's going to be a difficult battle. We're going to need all of your help, 100%. Whoever gets that nomination, we're going to have to work together. Thank you.
Last question, 60 seconds.
Hey, I have a question. Why aren't we we're discussing violence. Why aren't we discussing the most violent country in the world who spends over half of their discretionary budget on the military? We haven't had one question from this audience or from you.
So we had an opportunity to take questions from the audience, and I didn't see that question on any card. So the last question is, thank you, sir. And you can address that if you choose in the last 60 seconds. What important issue would you like to discuss that was not asked? So you should ask. And we will start with you.
Thank you.
There are so many. You know, I don't think we talked enough about campaign finance reform. It really wasn't in a question, and it's a really important issue that we need to be talking about. So I'd like to use some of my time just to talk about money in the legislative process. It's not just campaign finance reform. Of course, overturning Citizens United and really seeing things like For the People's Act come to fruition is definitely a must, but that's almost like the easy talking points. The reality is that not only in campaign finance and the dark money, the lack of transparency, but money is buying elections. And it's not just buying the day for that particular vote when a candidate is either going to have success or not, but it is chronically through our entire legislative process. And I use this term, I think appropriately, that it is a cancer that needs to be cut out. It also, in our lobbying, we have so many lobbyists that we have a 21-to-1 ratio in Congress. That's a seriously large amount of money that is being used to not only impact elections, but also each bill that's being voted on.
Unfortunately, the gentleman just left, but I agree with him that financing endless wars is extremely problematic for us as a nation. It does not allow us to be a 21st century global citizen in the way that we need to be. And just recently, I left North Carolina with Reverend Barbara, who is leading the Poor People's Campaign. And we have enough money in our budget to do many of the things that we already want to do without raising taxes if we shifted the way in which we focus our budget. The Poor People's Campaign has created a Poor People's budget for the United States, and we would still outspend 7 of the top militaries in our global relationships. So I agree with the gentleman, and I understand his frustration. Sorry that he left.
I'll address the donkey in the room. The state party has been scrupulously neutral in this race. The national party has not. And it's in part because Chuck Schumer and the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee prefer to simply sell Senate seats to the highest bidder and continue to scoop up the contributions they make from oil companies and insurance companies and drug companies. If we're serious about giving Coloradans the right to pick our own senator, we ought to demand that the national parties stand down and let Colorado decide. I said at the outset, I'll support any of the candidates on this stage against Cory Gardner. It's important that you do the same, because what divides us as Democrats is a narrower band of issues than what separates us from the Republican Party today. But if we continue to put public offices up for auction, we might as well hang a sign outside the U.S. Senate that says only millionaires need apply. If we continue to do that, we will dramatically narrow the candidates pool who run, those who win, and warp the decisions they make. This is on us.
Yeah.
I'll also address the question from the gentleman who just left. I believe that we are destroying ourselves from within. I believe that we are over-militarized, that we are essentially going into other countries and interfering in other people's business in order to defend oil. And this relates to climate, this relates to our weaknesses. We have allowed other countries to essentially defeat our democracy. And don't believe that we are not in dire straits. Don't believe that this is not very serious business. Our elections have been compromised by our enemies. We have a real problem with our foreign policy and our administration at the moment. I'm a huge advocate for impeachment. I believe that it's going to happen, but there is no savior coming. All of us, there is no savior. It is up to you all to make change, to get friends to vote, and to get involved, because it's not one person who's going to save us from our own selves.
I think I'll take a swing at the military-industrial complex myself, and especially now as we really begin to see what the consequences are of an erratic, irrational president like Donald Trump, who would betray allies who had risked, in many cases, lost their lives fighting beside us, the Kurds. And I think one way to look at this And I think this is really true. He ignores all the advice. He's eviscerated the Department of State. And I think Congress has to be able to stand up to the president and say, listen, military might isn't the only solution. And I think we should go not just back to where we were under President Obama, but go beyond that in terms of our diplomatic strength. And if you think about it, the globe has shrunken to the point where climate change, pandemics like Ebola, cybersecurity, all these things demand constant negotiation. I think that constant engagement and expanding our Department of State and giving them the resources would be a huge step in the right direction.
I just want to draw attention to my shirt really quick. It says #kiss Cory goodbye. There you go. Okay, so I'm actually going to talk about education, and with that also address the military question. While we know that the creation of our budget starts with the House, the Senate still has to approve a budget. And I've committed in my platform, which you can see at lorenaforsenate.com, a budget that reaches parity between military spending and education spending. That means that we can then fund 0 through 12 education, including higher education at a much greater level. A lot of the questions come up, well, how is that going to get to the districts? Because we also know that at every state, education funding is a state issue. Yet, we have programs like No Child Left Behind that screwed over a lot of schools. We have programs like even Race to the Top that screwed over a lot of schools. We can create community block grants that will incentivize schools and prepare schools that are not doing so well to be better. Thank you.
I want everyone to give all of these candidates a hand. As you all know, it takes a lot of guts to run for office. I think they've got information back there, so please get involved with one or more of these candidates. We have to make sure that we beat Cory Gardner. Thank all of you for coming.
Let me invite everybody to come by and pick up a can of climate education flyer and a lot of Western Colorado on it.
Especially around politicians. Yeah. At 5, right? That's okay. Probably people here for 10 or 15.
Yeah.